There is a stone at the edge of the marshes that the Fen clans call the moot-stone, and every soul born to the wet country knows that what is spoken there cannot be unspoken. It is where vows are made. It is where names are given. And on the night the elders summon Helen Harrowgate to stand before it, it is where a bargain she never agreed to is laid at her feet, like a snare in the reeds. She is the warden of the marches. She knows every causeway and every false floor of bog between her hold and the northern water. She has tracked poachers through fog so thick a man could lose his own hands in it, and she has brought the lost home, and she has buried the ones the marsh kept. She asks for nothing but the land and the right to walk it. So when the elder Mordecai Veldane tells her, before the whole clan, that she has been promised, that a mate has been chosen for her, a man she has never seen, a man whose face will stay hidden until the binding is done, that she will be bound at the next dark moon whether her heart consents or not, because the marches need the alliance, and a warden's refusal is a luxury the clan cannot afford. She says one word, no, and the marsh goes silent, and the torches gutter, and Mordecai Veldane smiles. The way a man smiles when he has already won, and he says, soft enough that only the front rank can hear it, then you are no longer ours. Walk out, Helen Harrowgate. Walk out into the dark and do not come back. And when you are cold enough and hungry enough, you will learn what your refusal cost you. She does not weep. She gathers her coat, and her knife, and the small bag of what is hers, and she walks out past the torches and the silent faces of the only people she has ever belonged to, out past the boundary mark she carved into the moot-stone with her own hand a winter ago, the mark that says this far the safe ground reaches. Past it now, into the soft country where the marsh has you. What she does not know, walking out into the dark, is the name of the man she refused. She does not know it is the name a kingdom kneels to. She does not know that the very man she has just cast out of her future is, at this hour, riding the marches under a borrowed name with no crown on his head, looking for the one thing that could save the North or lose it. She does not know that her refusal in the dark, the thing Veldane swears will be the end of her, is the first thread of a knot that will undo him. She knows only the cold and the dark and the long stretch of treacherous ground between her and morning, and the central question, the one the marsh itself seems to ask as the water closes black over her footprints behind her. What does a refusal cost when you do not even know the name of what you refused? Chapter 1. The wayhouse sat on a hummock of dry ground 3 miles past the last good causeway, and Helen reached it past midnight with her coat soaked through and her hands gone past feeling. She had not meant to come this far. She had meant to walk only until the lights of the hold were behind her, and then to stop and let the cold and the anger burn down to something she could think through. But anger had carried her further than sense, out across the spongy peat where one wrong step meant the bog took you to the waist, and she had walked the way she always walked, reading the ground by the set of the reeds and the smell of the water, until she saw the low orange square of a shuttered window. She knew the wayhouse. Every warden knew it. A shelter built generations back for hunters caught out by the tide, kept stocked by an unspoken law of the marsh. You took what you needed, you left what you could, and you did not ask who had been there before you. She pushed the door. It gave. Inside, a fire had been built up in the stone hearth, and a man sat beside it with his back to the wall and his hands loose on his knees, and he looked up at her without surprise, as if he had been expecting someone, though clearly not her. "The causeway's under," he said. "You came across the peat." "I came across the peat. In the dark." "I'm a warden," she said. I came across the peat in the dark because I know the peat in the dark. Is the fire yours? The fire's the marshes, he said. Same as the roof. Sit down before you fall down. She did not like being told to sit. She liked even less that her knees had already begun to fold. She crossed to the hearth and lowered herself onto the bench across from him, and she let the heat reach her, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. He was not a young man and not an old one. Dark auburn hair swept back from a face that had spent its years outdoors, a short braid at the left temple, a jaw shadowed with travel. A plain coat, slate gray, worn at the cuffs. A border rider, she judged. One of the men who carried word between the holds and the far roads, who slept where night caught them and asked no one's leave. His eyes, when the fire caught them, were a strange warm amber. She had never seen eyes that color. She told herself it was the firelight. "You're hurt," he said. "I'm cold." "You're hurt," he said again, and nodded at her hand, and she looked down and saw the long shallow cut across the back of her knuckles where a sedge of marsh grass had opened the skin and she had not even felt it. "It's nothing." "It's a cut on a cold hand that you didn't notice," he said, "which means your hands have stopped telling you the truth. Give it here." And she did not know afterward why she did. She was a woman who had been told what to do once that night already, and had refused it, and lost everything for the refusing. But there was something in the flat plainness of how he said it, no command in it, only the same matter-of-factness with which he'd named the causeway under water. She put out her hand. He cleaned the cut with water from a skin and bound it with a strip of clean linen, and his hands were careful and warm, far warmer than hers. Warm enough that where his fingers closed around her wrist, she felt the cold in her own skin like a separate country. She noticed it the way you notice a sound that has been there all along. The contrast. His warmth against her cold. "There," he said. "You'll keep." "Why?" she said. "Why what?" "Why would you do that for a stranger who walked in out of the dark?" He sat back. He looked at her with those amber eyes, and something moved behind them that she could not read, and he said, "Because the marshes law is you take what you need, and you leave what you can. You needed it. I could leave it." A pause. "And because a person walking the peat in the dark in midwinter is a person walking away from something. I've done it myself." She said nothing. "You don't have to tell me what," he said. "I'm not asking." And he didn't ask. He banked the fire and gave her the dry corner and took the wet one for himself, and Helen Harrowgate lay awake in a hunter's wayhouse 3 miles past the last good causeway, listening to a stranger breathe, thinking about a stone at the edge of the marshes and a word she would say again 1,000 times before she would unsay it. She thought about what Veldane had said, cold enough and hungry enough. He had meant it as a curse, a thing that would break her. The slow education of the marsh teaching her she had been a fool. But here she was, cold and hungry both, and what she felt was not the lesson he had wanted her to learn. What she felt, lying in the firelight with the cut on her hand bound by a stranger's careful fingers, was something dangerously close to peace. The marsh had not killed her. The marsh had carried her to a warm room and a man who looked at her and saw only a person walking away from something. When had anyone last looked at her and not seen the warden first, the function, the use? She could not remember. Her whole life she had been the marsh's eyes, the clan's hands, the thing that read the ground so others could walk it safely, useful, always useful, never simply seen. She did not know his name. She told herself it did not matter. It mattered more than she would let herself know. Chapter 2. In the gray of the morning he was gone, and so was the worst of the water. the causeway showing its black back above the tide, and Helen told herself she was glad of it. She was not glad of it. She made her way to the marsh hold at the causeway's far end, a low, fortified house of gray stone where the fen wife Breda kept the stores and the sick and the old, and where a warden cast out of her own clan might find, if not welcome, at least a roof that did not belong to Mordecai Veldane. Breda was a small woman, bent as a fishhook, with hands that had pulled half the marshes into the world and laid the other half out of it. She looked at Helen standing wet in her doorway, and she did not say anything foolish about sorrow. She said, "There's broth. Sit. You can earn your keep when your hands work again." So Helen stayed. She earned her keep. She walked the near causeways for Brida, and brought back word of the water and the weather. She mended the marsh hold's nets and relaid the worst of its rotten flooring and learned, slowly, that a warden without a clan is still a warden, that the land does not ask to see your papers. It was at the marsh hold she met Oric. He was a clan runner, 16 and all elbows, the sort of boy the elders sent with messages because he was too young to matter and too quick to catch. He had run word between the holds since he could walk, and he had a runner's gift for never being noticed and a runner's vice of noticing everything. He found her mending net on the third day and sat down across from her uninvited and said, "You're the one who said no to the elder." "I'm the one." "They're saying you drowned." "Do I look drowned?" Oric considered this with great seriousness. "No," he allowed. "But that's the trouble with the elders' stories. They don't need you to actually do the thing. They just need everyone to agree you did." He picked at the net. "I carry his messages, you know. South, mostly. To men who don't give me their names and pay me not to read what I'm carrying, which is a fine way to make a runner read it." He looked at her sidelong. "You want to know what's in them? Should you be telling me?" "Probably not," Oric said cheerfully. "But you said no to him, and I've wanted to say no to him my whole life and never had the spine. Seems the least I can do is tell the one person who managed it what she's up against." She liked him at once. It is a rare thing, in a country that has cast you out, to be liked by someone with nothing to gain by it, and she learned the marsh hold was not the safe, forgotten place she had thought. "Riders," Brida said one evening, low, the two of them alone by the fire. "Up from the south? Veldane's had them through twice this month. Men in good coats who don't give names and don't drink and ask after the causeways, which roads bear weight, which holds will stand and which will fall." The old woman's eyes were sharp as awls. "A warden would know what kind of man asks those questions." "A man who means to move something heavy," Helen said, "or many men. An army moves on the roads that bear weight." "Aye," Brida said. "And the marshes are the only soft door into the whole of the north. Always have been. A southern lord who held the marches could put a knife at the back of every northern hold from here to the high water. Could put a knife," she said very quietly, "at the back of the Alpha King himself." The fire popped. Helen turned the word over. The Alpha King. A name spoken in the marshes the way you spoke of the moon or the tide, a power so far above the wet country that it seemed less a man than a season. She had grown up on stories of him the way children grow up on weather. The Wolf King of the north, who held the high holds against the south, whose word was law from the mountains to the marsh edge, whom no one she had ever met had laid eyes on. He was not a person to the marsh. He was a direction, north, safety, the thing the cold came from, and the thing that kept the worse cold out. "And what does that have to do with a binding?" Helen said, "that I refused." Brida looked at her a long moment. The fenwife had a way of looking that made you feel she had already pulled your whole life out into the light and laid it on the table and was simply waiting for you to catch up to what she saw. You were the warden, she said. You knew every floor of the marsh. A man who wanted to move an army through the soft door would need that knowledge, or he would need it silenced. Veldane chose a mate for you, sight unseen, and would not show his face. Did you never ask yourself what kind of man buys a warden in the dark? Helen had not asked herself. She had only said no. She had said no because the binding was a leash, and she had spent her whole life being useful and would not be used. She had thought it was about her freedom, her one refusal, the single thing in her life she could keep for herself. She had not thought, even once, that her no might be the only no standing between a hidden army and the back of the North. She said no again now, under her breath, in the firelight, and did not yet understand that she had refused the very thing that might have damned the North, and that the man she had refused was not the man she thought. Chapter 3. The border rider came back to the wayhouse, and so, somehow, did she. She told herself she was walking the far causeway for Brida. She told herself the wayhouse was only the natural turn of the round. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that she had thought about a pair of amber eyes more nights than she would admit, and that the marsh hold, for all its broth and its roof, was full of people who knew her name and her shame, and the wayhouse was full of exactly one man who did not. He was splitting wood when she came over the rise. He had his coat off despite the cold, his shirt sleeves shoved up, and he worked with an economy that told her he had done it 10,000 times, and he did not stop when he saw her, only said, "Warden," as if they had parted an hour ago. "Rider," she said, "you look better than the last time. Your hand's telling you the truth again?" "Some of it." He set down the axe. "Sit. I'll make tea. It's foul tea, but it's hot." It was foul tea, and it was hot. They drank it on the bench in the thin sun, and they talked. And it was the easiest talking Helen had done in her life, because he did not know what she was and so could not weigh her against it. She told him about the marsh without telling him she'd been its warden. He told her about the roads without telling her where they led. They circled each other's silences like two people stepping around a bog they could both see. "You talk like a man who's used to being obeyed," she said once, and then catches himself. He laughed, surprised out of his guard. "Do I?" "You do. You give the smallest order, and then you take the order out of it, like you've remembered you're not supposed to. Sit down before you fall down. Give it here. Drink your tea." She tilted her head. "A border rider doesn't order anyone. A border rider asks because he's always the lowest man in any room he rides into. So either you're a very strange border rider, or you're not one at all." For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked into his foul tea and said quietly, "What if I told you I'm a man who spent a long time being obeyed, and got so tired of it, he rode out into a marsh to find one place where no one knew to obey him?" "I'd say that's the saddest thing I ever heard," she said. "To be tired of being obeyed. Why sad?" "Because it means no one ever just chose you. They only ever did as you said." She turned her cup in her cold hands. "I'd take being chosen over being obeyed any day of my life. I never had either." Something moved across his face that she could not read, something that looked almost like pain, almost like hope. He opened his mouth as if to say something true, and closed it, and she watched him put it away. "You ask a lot of questions about the holds," she said, to fill the silence. "Which roads bear weight? Which causeways stand?" Something stilled in him. "Do I?" "You do. Same questions Veldane's southern riders ask," Brida says. "And what do you think I am?" he said. "Asking them?" She looked at him. The plain coat, the careful hands, the amber eyes that did not flinch. "I think," she said slowly, That you're either one of the men putting the knife in, or one of the men trying to find where it's pointed." He was quiet a long moment. "And which would you rather I was?" he asked. It was not a fair question, and they both knew it. She did not answer it. But her cold hand was wrapped around a hot cup, and the contrast of it ran all the way up her arm, and she thought, not for the first time, that the marsh had a way of warming you only enough to make you feel how cold you'd been. "I have to go back," she said, standing. "You always have to go back," he said. "One of these times you'll come and you won't." "Is that a question?" "No," he said. "It's the only thing I'm sure of." She went back, but she carried the warmth of the cup in her cold hands the whole 3 miles, and she did not understand yet why a man whose name she did not know had become the one fixed point in a marsh that had cast her out. Chapter 4. The water came early that year, and it came wrong. A warden reads the marsh the way other people read a face, and Helen had been reading a wrongness for a week before she could name it. The tide running where it should not. The causeway softening out of season. The reeds laid flat in the wrong direction as if something heavy had been hauled across the soft country in the dark. She walked the lines Bryda could not, and she found, on the 3rd day, the thing she had been smelling without knowing. Oric had set her on it, in his sidelong way. He had come into the marsh hold the night before with a message bag he was not supposed to open, and a face that said he had opened it anyway. "South Road's busy," he had told her, low, by the fire. "Busier than it should be for winter. I carried a thing yesterday I shouldn't have read. A tally of wagons. Numbers, Warden. Big numbers with a date. The dark moon." He had swallowed. What moves by the dark moon, in numbers, into a marsh? Nothing good. Nothing she had wanted to find. But a warden does not get to choose what the ground tells her. A new causeway, hidden, laid with cut faggots of brushwood and sunk timber under the standing water where no honest hold would build, running south to north across the very softest of the marsh, broad enough and firm enough to bear weight. To bear, she thought, her stomach dropping, many men, or wagons, or the slow, heavy traffic of a force moving where no force should be able to move. She crouched and put her hand to the sunk timber under the cold water and read it the way she read everything, and what it told her made the breath go out of her. Fresh cut. Southern oak, not marsh alder. Laid by men who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how to hide it. Sunk just deep enough that the standing water swallowed it from any eye but a warden's. Anyone else would walk this stretch and see only marsh. She saw a road. She saw an army's road, and the date Oric had read, and the whole shape of it dropped into place like a stone into a bog. Someone had built the soft door into a hard one. And she was standing on it, alone, in the open, when she heard the horses. She went flat into the reeds. 4 riders, southern coats, and at their head, unmistakable even at distance, the heavy fur-trimmed mantle of Mordecai Veldane. They had come to inspect the work. She lay in the cold water with the reeds closing over her, and she listened, and she heard enough. "By the dark moon," Veldane was saying, "the northern hold sleep soft because they trust the marsh to keep them. They've trusted it 1,000 years. They will not believe an army can come through the wet country until it is standing in their halls." "And the warden?" one of the riders said. "The one who knew the floors. The one who could read this for what it is." "Gone," Veldane said. "Cast out. Cold by now, I should think, or close to it. I told you. A refusal is the cheapest thing in the world to punish. You simply take away the ground under a person's feet and let the marsh do the rest." He laughed low. She might have ruined everything, that one, if she'd only said yes and been brought inside where I could watch her. Instead, she made herself nothing, and saved me the trouble. Helen lay in the cold and burned, so that was the binding. That was the mate chosen sight unseen, the face that would stay hidden until the deed was done. Not a marriage, a leash. Veldane had meant to bind the warden's knowledge to his plot, to own the one set of eyes that could read his hidden causeway. And when she would not be owned, he had simply erased her. She had refused, and not even known what she refused. She waited until the horses were gone. Then she rose, dripping, shaking, and she did not go back to the marsh hold. She went to the wayhouse. Because there was one man in the wet country who asked the same questions as Veldane's riders, and she had to know, now, tonight, which kind of man he was. She came over the rise at a run, and the rain came down, and the causeway behind her was already going under, and she misjudged it. One step in the dark on ground she should have known, and the marsh that had never taken her took her now, the soft floor giving way, the cold black water closing over her thigh, her waist, her chest, the peat sucking her down with the patient hunger of a thing that has all the time in the world. She did not scream. A warden does not scream. A warden knows screaming spends the air she needs. But she heard, through the rain, a door and running feet, and a voice she knew shouting a word, and the word was not a name. The word was hers, Helen. Chapter 5. He should not have been able to reach her. The ground he crossed to reach her was ground that should have taken him, too, and a part of her, even drowning, even with the cold climbing into her chest like a hand, marveled at how he ran it, as if he could read the floor of the marsh as well as she could, as if the wet country were as much his as hers. He went down on his belly at the edge of the firm ground, and he reached, and his hand closed around her wrist, and his grip was warm, savagely warm, warm enough to feel through the killing cold of the water. And he hauled, and the marsh did not want to give her up, and he hauled again with everything in him, and swore the marsh's own name at it, and dragged her up out of the peat and back onto the firm ground, and held her there in the rain while she coughed the black water out of her chest. "I have you," he kept saying. "I have you. I have you." He carried her into the wayhouse. He stripped the freezing coat off her, and wrapped her in every dry thing he had, and built the fire up until the small stone room roared with heat, and he held her hands between his own, and would not let go, chafing the warmth back into them, his warmth into her cold, until she could feel her own fingers again and feel, through them, the steady, terrible pounding of his pulse, where his thumb pressed her wrist, far too fast, the pulse of a man who had been more frightened than he would ever say. She watched him in the firelight while the feeling came back into her body. He had not stopped touching her since he pulled her out, his hands moving over her wrists, her shoulders, her face. Not the way a man touches a woman, but the way a man touches a thing he thought he had lost, again and again, to make certain. There was rain still in his dark hair and marsh water to his waist, and he had not so much as glanced at his own soaked clothes. All of him was bent toward her. All of him was checking that she was real. No one, she thought, had ever come across the peat for her. The marsh had carried her out of the clan, and into the dark, and not one soul had followed. But this man, who did not even know her name 2 weeks ago, had heard her go into the water and crossed ground that should have killed him without a half-breath of hesitation. The cold she had always lived in, the lifelong, useful, solitary cold, cracked a little. Through the crack came the warmth of his hands, and it frightened her more than the marsh had. "You came across the peat," she managed. "In the rain, in the dark. No one can run that floor." "You ran it," he said. "I'm the warden." "Were," he said quietly, And she went still, because she had never told him. How do you know that? His hands stilled around hers. The fire cracked. And for a long moment he said nothing, and she watched the firelight move in his amber eyes, and she saw him decide something, and set it down again, and choose the smaller truth. Bryda told me, he said. I've been to the marsh hold. I told you. I ask questions about the holds. A pause. I asked about you. It was true. And it was not the whole truth. And she was too cold and too frightened and too grateful to hear the gap in it. She only heard that he had asked about her, that she had become, to him, a thing worth asking after. And was that not its own small miracle? She had been the marsh's warden, its eyes and its hands, useful to a whole clan, and not one of them had asked after her when the dark took her. This man, who owed her nothing, had asked. The thought sat warm in her chest beside the fear, and she did not yet know to be afraid of how much that warmth had already become her shelter, more than any roof, more than the marsh itself. There's a causeway, she said. Hidden. Veldane built it. He's going to move men through the soft country to the back of the northern holds, to the back of the king himself. The binding was never a marriage. He wanted to own me because I could read the floor. I refused, and he cast me out so the one set of eyes that could see what he was doing would be gone. Her voice broke. I refused him, and I didn't even know what I was refusing. I thought it was my freedom. It was the whole north. He had gone very, very still. Say that again, he said. The hidden causeway. Where? The softest run. South to north. I can take you to it. I can take you to it tonight if you... Not tonight. His hands tightened on hers. Tonight you stay warm. Tomorrow. He looked at her, and something in his face had changed. Some last easiness burned out of it, and what was left underneath was harder and older and, she thought, far more dangerous than a border rider had any right to be. Helen, listen to me. You did not lose the north by refusing. You may have saved it. The only thing Veldane didn't count on is that the warden he cast out would land in the one place that could carry what she knows to the one man who can stop him. He drew a breath. Trust me a little longer. Just a little longer. Can you do that? She looked at the man whose name she did not know. I don't even know what to call you, she said. And he opened his mouth and closed it, and the firelight moved, and for one heartbeat she saw the truth standing right behind his eyes, close enough to touch. Theron, he said. Call me Theron. It was true. It was only not all of his name. She let it be enough. The fire warmed her. His hands warmed her. And somewhere out in the dark, the marsh closed over the hidden road, and the dark moon came on. Chapter 6. The cold store at the back of the wayhouse was where the hunters had always hung their take, a low stone room half sunk into the hummock, and it was where Helen went the next morning to fetch the dried fish for the journey, and it was where the door swung shut behind her and the bolt slid home from the outside. She did not panic. A warden does not panic in a dark room. She finds the walls. Theron? She called. The bolt's stuck. The bolt's... The bolt's not stuck, said a voice through the door. And it was not Theron's voice. It was the dry, satisfied voice of Mordecai Veldane. The bolt is exactly where I put it. Did you think I wouldn't have the wayhouse watched, Warden? Did you think the marsh had only one set of eyes? You've been seen, coming and going, with your border rider, and now you've gone and found my road, and that I cannot have. Helen put her back to the stone and her hand to her knife. You're going to leave me here, she said. The water comes up tonight, Veldane said, almost gently. The store floods at the high tide. It always has. You'll simply be a warden who drowned in a flooded marsh, which is a thing that happens to wardens, and no one will ask. I did try to make this easy, Helen. I offered you a binding. You had only to say yes, and you'd be alive and warm and useful. Instead, you said no, and now you'll say nothing at all. A pause. Where is your rider, by the way? I'd half hoped to find him here. I do dislike loose threads. And then footsteps, going, and silence, and the cold dark and the slow first finger of water already creeping in under the door. She did not waste breath on the door. She put her hands on the walls, and she read them the way she read the marsh, and she found, where the old stone met the hummock, a place where the mortar had rotted and the peat behind it had softened, and she dug at it with the horn handle of her knife, and the cold water rose past her ankles, past her shins, and she dug. She did not hear the bolt draw. She heard the door crash open and the gray daylight fall in, and a hand close around her arm, warm, that warmth she would have known in any dark, hauling her up and out and into the cold, bright morning. Theron, soaked to the waist himself, his face white with a fear that had stopped pretending to be anything else. He bolted the store, she gasped. Veldane. He knows about the road. He knows about you. He said. I know what he said. His hands were on her face, her shoulders checking her, the way a man checks that the impossible thing in front of him is real. I followed him. I heard. Helen. And he stopped, because there was nothing careful left in either of them, nothing held back, only two people who had each just hauled the other out of the marsh's mouth, and the contrast was gone. His warmth and her cold, the same thing now, the same fear, the same terrible relief. She did not know who moved first. It did not matter. He kissed her, or she kissed him, in the gray light at the edge of the cold store with the water still pouring off them both. And it was not gentle, and it was not careful, and it said everything that the circling silences had not. His hands in her wet hair, her cold fingers fisted in his soaked coat, the pulse hammering in both their throats, the same pulse, the same wild rhythm, as if some long-locked thing had finally fallen into place. It was the first time in her life she had ever reached for a person instead of for the ground. A warden's hands were always reaching for the ground, reading it, testing it, trusting the cold earth before any living thing. Now her hands were full of a man who was warm all the way through, and the earth could keep itself, and she did not care that the store had nearly drowned her, or that the dark moon was rising, or that her whole clan thought her dead. She cared about the warmth. She had been cold her whole life and had called it strength, and here was the warmth she had refused without knowing she was refusing it, and it undid her. When they broke apart, they were both shaking, and not with cold. I have to tell you something, he said against her temple, and his voice was wrecked. Helen, before tonight, before the moot-stone, there's something you don't know, and you have to know it, because what I'm about to ask you to do, I can't ask a woman who's been lied to. I have to ask a woman who knows exactly who's asking. Then tell me, she whispered. But there was a horn sounding across the marsh, low and long, the clan horn, the summoning horn, the horn that called every soul of the wet country to the moot-stone, and Theron went rigid and swore, and the words died in his mouth. Veldane's moved his hour up, he said. He's calling the moot. He's going to do it tonight, in front of the clan, make it legal, make it theirs, so that when the army comes through, no one can say they didn't all agree. He took her face in his hands. There's no time. I'll tell you at the stone. I swear it on the marsh's own name. I'll tell you at the stone, in front of all of them, because that's where it has to be said. His amber eyes burned. Will you stand at the moot-stone tonight, Helen Harrowgate? Will you cross that ground one more time, the ground they cast you out of, and say what you know in front of every soul who watched you go?" She had been cast out of that ground. She had walked away from the moot-stone in the dark, believing she would never be allowed to stand on it again. "Yes," she said. She did not yet know what she was agreeing to stand beside. Chapter 7. By dusk, the whole clan was gathered at the moot-stone, ringed in torchlight, the great gray stone black against the last green of the sky, and Mordecai Veldane stood beside it in his fur-trimmed mantle with his bone and iron pact ring catching the fire, and he was telling them a story. It was a good story. It was the story of a clan too long ignored by the North, of a southern alliance that would make the marshes rich, of a binding that would seal the bargain, and of a warden, poor mad warden, who had refused her duty and walked out into the marsh and been lost, as the faithless always are. He told it well. The clan listened. And Helen Harrowgate stood at the dark edge of the torchlight in her warden's coat, with her heart going like the marsh tide, and understood that no one here would believe her. She was the cast-out, the faithless, her word against an elder's, in the dark at the stone. She would have to cross the whole ring of them, alone, to be heard. So she did. She walked out of the dark and into the torchlight, and across the open ground to the moot-stone, and she felt every eye of the clan that had cast her out turn and follow her, and she did not stop, and she did not hurry, and she walked the way a warden walks ground she knows, until she stood at the very face of the stone, with Mordecai Veldane on one side of it, and the whole of her people on the other. "You said I drowned," she said. Her voice carried. The marsh was silent for it. "You told them I was lost, but here I am. So either the marsh gave me back or you lied. Which is it, Elder?" Veldane's face did not change, but the ring in the firelight caught his hand as it closed. "You are not welcome at this stone," he said. "You were cast out. You have no voice here." "The stone gives the voice," Helen said, "not you. That's the law. Older than you. Older than your bargain. Anyone who stands at the moot-stone may be heard, and what is spoken here cannot be unspoken. You taught me that yourself, the night you cast me out. So I will speak, and you will not stop me, because the only way to stop me is to break your own law in front of all of them, and then they'll wonder what else you'd break." A murmur ran through the clan. "There is a road in the marsh," she said, and turned to her people, her voice rising. "A hidden causeway, sunk under the soft water where no honest hold would build, broad enough to bear an army, running south to north, straight to the back door of every northern hold. I found it. I'm the warden. I read the floor of this marsh better than any of you, better than him, and I am telling you it is there, and I am telling you what it is for." She drew breath. He didn't choose a mate for me to honor me. He chose a leash. He wanted to own the one set of eyes that could see his road, and when I wouldn't be owned, he cast me out so I'd be silent and cold and gone. He told 4 southern riders so himself, on his own causeway, 3 days ago. He said, and I'll give you his words, that a refusal is the cheapest thing in the world to punish, that you take the ground from under a person's feet and let the marsh do the rest. The murmur became something darker. "Lies," Veldane said, but his voice had thinned. "Where is your road, warden? Show us. Take us all out onto the soft water in the dark, shall we, on the word of a mad woman. She's not lying." The voice came from the crowd, thin and young and cracking on the last word, and Oryx stepped out into the torchlight, white-faced and shaking and braver than Helen had ever seen him. "I carry your messages, Elder. South, to men who don't give their names. I read one. A tally of wagons, with a date, the dark moon, and a mark at the bottom I didn't understand till now. He pointed at Veldane's hand. It was that ring, pressed into the wax. I've carried your road in my own bag and never knew it. She's not the madwoman. You are the liar, and I'm done caring for you. A boy, a runner, the lowest soul in the wet country, and he had just spent the only thing he had, which was his own safety, to stand beside her. Helen looked at him and could not speak for a moment, because she knew exactly what that crossing had cost him, and she knew he had made it anyway. I'll take them in the morning, Helen said, finding her voice, turning back to Veldane. Gladly. The whole clan. I'll walk every soul of you out to the road, and you can put your own hands on the southern oak under the water. But I don't even need to, because you're wearing the proof on your hand. Silence. The pact ring, she said. Bone and iron. A southern thing. We don't make them in the marsh. It's a tally ring, elder, isn't it? A bargain keeper. Every southern lord who seals a pact gets one cut, and the cuts are a record, a count, names and debts notched into the iron where a man can deny them with his mouth, but not with his hand. She looked at the clan. Bryda knew it for what it was the first time she saw it. Ask her. Ask any of the old ones who remember the southern traders. And the boy just told you he's seen its mark pressed into the wax of the very messages that built the road. That ring is a signed confession he can't take off, and he's been waving it in your faces this whole while, so sure none of you would know what you were looking at. Veldane's hand had gone to the ring, closed over it, hid it. And the gesture was the whole confession. 100 eyes saw a man cover the thing on his hand the instant it was named, and 100 minds understood all at once the way a marsh understands the turning of the tide. She had not raised a hand. She had not raised her voice past what the stone required. She had simply seen and named what she saw, and let the seeing do the rest, which was the only way a warden ever won anything. "Take it off," said old Bryda, stepping out of the crowd, her all-sharp eyes fixed on the ring. "Take it off and show us the iron, Mordecai. Show us there are no names cut in it. Show us, and I'll call her a liar myself." He did not take it off. "That's not proof," he said, backing a step. "That's a warden's wild tale and an old woman's spite. You have no right. You have no standing. You have no—" And he turned to flee the torchlight and found that the ring of the clan had closed, that there was nowhere out of it, that the people of the wet country had quietly, without a word, made themselves a wall. "You have no voice here," Helen said softly. "You were just cast out. By them. It happens fast, doesn't it? The ground simply goes out from under your feet." And then a new voice spoke from the dark at the edge of the torchlight, and it was a voice the whole clan knew without ever having heard it, the way you know thunder, and it said, "He'll have voice enough where he's going. There's a law in the north for men who'd sell its back door to the south. He can answer to that one." Chapter 8. Theron walked out of the dark into the torchlight, and he was not wearing the slate-gray coat. He wore dark-scaled leather and a half-mantle of black wolf fur across his shoulders, and a copper wolf gorget at his throat, and on his dark auburn hair, plain and thin and unmistakable, an iron crown. And behind him, where there had been empty marsh a moment before, stood ranks of riders with the wolf on their breasts, who had come up the hard causeways in the dark as quiet as the tide. The clan went down like reeds before wind, every soul of them sinking to one knee, and Mordecai Veldane's face came apart, because he of all of them knew exactly who he was looking at, had been looking for him, had built a hidden road to put a knife in his back. And Helen Harrowgate stood alone on her feet at the moot-stone, because she had not understood yet, and stared at the man whose hands had warmed her cold ones, and felt the marsh tilt under her. "Theron," she said. Her voice was very small in the great silence, Theron, what is— It's my name, he said, and he had crossed to her now, and he stopped an arm's length away, and he did not touch her, because the touching had to be hers to allow now, and he knew it. Theron. It's only not all of it. The rest of it is the one they kneel for. His amber eyes did not leave her face. I came into the marsh quiet, with no name and no crown, because a king who comes loud sees only what men want him to see. I came to find the soft door before someone else did, and I found a warden in a wayhouse instead. His voice roughened. I'm the man, Helen. I'm the mate Veldane chose for you. Sight unseen. He went to the north for an alliance and asked for a binding to a marsh warden to seal it, and I never agreed to a forced thing. I swear it to you. I came to see the marches and the warden both before any binding was spoken of, and then you said no to him in the dark, before I ever set eyes on you. You refused me, and you never knew it was me you refused. The whole marsh held its breath. You knew, Helen said. The cold was climbing into her chest again, the marsh water cold, the betrayed cold. All those mornings at the wayhouse. You knew who I was. You knew what I'd refused. You knew it was you, and you let me sit there and tell you about the marsh like you were no one. You let me— Her voice cracked. You let me drown a little every day, not knowing. I let you meet a man, he said, instead of a crown. Helen. Every soul who's ever looked at me has seen the iron first and the man never. From the day I could walk, I have been a use to someone. A sword, a shield, a name to put a knife behind or a wall behind. Obeyed and obeyed and obeyed, and never once. Not once in my whole life, simply chosen. His voice was raw now, the king's calm gone out of it. And then I rode into a marsh as nobody, and a half-drowned warden walked in out of the dark and told me she'd rather be chosen than obeyed any day of her life, and that she'd never had either. And I sat there with my crown in my saddlebag and thought, neither have I. You looked at me and saw a man. Just a man. Do you understand what that is? To a person who has been a function his whole life? It was the same thing you wanted. The exact same thing. I could not give it up. So I lied, and I am sorry, and I would lie again to have it, and that is the worst and truest thing I can tell you. She stood very still. Because it was the wound she carried, said back to her in his voice. Useful, never seen. The leash, never the choosing. She had thought herself the only one in the cold. And here was a king who had been colder and longer, and had crossed a marsh in the dark to sit beside the one person who looked at him and saw the man. Veldane chose you for me like choosing a tool, he went on lower. You'd have come to me if you'd said yes, as a thing acquired. I couldn't bear it. So I came into the marsh as nothing, as Theron, and I let you refuse me before you could be bound to me, because a refusal freely made is the only thing in this whole wet country that's truly yours, and I would not take it from you. You said no to a stranger in the dark, and it was the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do, and then you saved my kingdom by it. He took one step closer. I should have told you. At the cold store I tried to. At the stone I swore I would. I'm telling you now, in front of all of them, where it can't be unspoken. I am the king, and I am the man, and I have not wanted anything in my life the way I want you to choose me, knowing all of it. Not the warden, not the tool. You, knowing exactly who's asking. And the marsh waited. Helen Harrowgate looked at him. At the iron crown and the wolf fur and the amber eyes she had told herself, that first night, were only a trick of the firelight. She thought of the bound cut on her hand, the foul hot tea, the warmth of him hauling her out of the peat, saying, I have you, I have you. The pulse hammering in his throat, the same as hers. She thought. Every other binding in my life was a leash. He gave me the one thing no one else ever did. He let me refuse him first. You should have told me, she said. I know. You let me believe my refusal cost me everything. It cost you nothing, he said. It saved everything, including, if you'll let it, this. He held out his hand. Not a command, not a claim. Open, in the torchlight, the way you offer your hand to a thing that has every right to refuse you. Cross the ground one more time, Helen. Of your own feet. You crossed it cast out and they followed you. Cross it now because you choose to, and let it be the last crossing you ever make alone. She looked at the open hand. She had crossed this ground in the dark, banished. She had crossed it tonight, alone, to be heard. Both times the ground had been taken from under her, and both times she had walked it anyway. This time, the ground was hers. She closed the arm's length between them. She put her cold hand into his warm one, and his fingers closed around it, and the contrast that had run between them since the first night ran one last time and then slowly evened, his warmth into her cold until there was no telling whose was whose. I choose you, she said, low, for him alone, knowing all of it, the man and the crown. But the marsh is mine. The wardenship is mine. You don't get to bind that to anyone, not even you. I never wanted to bind it, he said. I wanted to walk it beside you. And he said the rest of it, the whole word, his true and entire name, low against her hair where only she could hear it, and she took it and kept it, and it was the first thing in her life that anyone had given her instead of taken. Behind them, the wolf riders closed quietly around Mordecai Veldane, and they did not harm him, because the North had a law for what he was, and the law would have him whole. He went into the dark the way she had once gone into it, ground gone from under his feet, but she did not watch him go. She had warmer things to look at. Epilogue. A year on, the marsh wore its high summer, the causeways firm and green, the water bright, and the moot-stone at the marsh's edge had a new thing carved into its old gray face. Not a name, not a crown, but the simple deep-cut line of a warden's boundary mark, the sign that says this far the safe ground reaches, walk past it and the marsh has you. Helen Harrowgate stood at the stone in her oiled green coat with her black braid down her back, and read the marsh the way she had read it all her life, and found it good. The hidden causeway was gone, broken up and sunk and given back to the soft water, the soft door soft again. The clan had named her warden once more, of their own moot, at this same stone, and this time the word had been theirs to give and hers to take. And the North slept easier for one woman's refusal in the dark. The marsh hold was busy now and warm. Bryda still kept the stores and the sick and the old, and still looked at people as if she had already laid their whole lives out on the table. And when Helen had come back from the moot-stone that first dawn with a king at her side, the fen-wife had only said, "Took you both long enough," and gone back to her broth, which was the closest thing to a blessing the old woman gave. Oric had a place in the North now. If he wanted it, the king had offered, a runner's gift was a rare thing, and an honest one rarer. The boy had thought about it for a day, and then asked, with great seriousness, whether he could carry the king's messages instead of the elders, and read everyone, since he was going to read them anyway. He had been told yes. He had been insufferable about it ever since. A horse came up the firm causeway, unhurried, and the man on it wore no crown today, only a plain travel coat, slate gray, worn at the cuffs, because here, in the wet country, he had asked to be only the man, and she had let him. He came north when the kingdom let him, and he came as Theron, and he split her wood and drank her foul tea and slept in the dry corner, and somewhere far to the north a kingdom waited for him, and did not begrudge the marsh its share, because a king who has finally been chosen is a better king than one who has only ever been obeyed. "Warden," he said, swinging down. "Rider," she said. He came and stood beside her at the stone, and looked out at the bright marsh, and put his warm hand over her cold one on the cold stone, and neither of them said anything for a while, because the best of what was between them had always lived in the silences they no longer had to circle. "You know," he said at last, "the night you walked out of this place, Veldane told you to go into the dark and learn what your refusal cost you. I remember. Did you ever learn it?" Helen Harrowgate looked at the marsh that was hers, and the stone that was hers, and the man whose whole name she carried like a warm coal in a cold hand, the man she had refused in the dark before she ever knew his face, the only person who had ever loved her enough to let her say no first. "I did," she said. "It cost me nothing I wanted to keep, and bought me everything I didn't dare hope for." She turned her hand over under his, so their palms met, warm to cold, cold to warm, even at last. "Let him spend his life learning that one. I've better ground to walk." And she leaned into the warmth of him, at the edge of her marsh, in the high green summer, and the tide came in soft and slow over ground that no one would ever take from under her feet again. The boundary mark on the moot-stone caught the late sun, the deep-cut line that said this far the safe ground reaches. She had carved it once as a warden marks a limit, a warning, the edge past which the marsh has you. She read it differently now. It was not only where the danger began. It was where the safe ground reached, and the safe ground reached further than she had ever dared to mark it. All the way to a man on a slate-gray coat who had crossed a marsh in the dark for a stranger, and stayed for the woman, and would cross it again and again, for as long as she would have him cross it. She would have him cross it a long time.